Let's start with our agenda, please. Item 1, the minutes, to approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 12th of March 2024. Is it your wish that I sign those as a true and accurate record? Thank you. Item 2, apologies. Carol, do we have any apologies?
Chairman, I've received apologies from councillors Bond, Burnett, Chapman, Dufty, Evans, Jackson, Spruce, K. Williams, D. Williams, and Kelly.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies from the floor? No? Thank you. Let's move on to item 3 then. This is the declaration of interest. Does any member have a reason to declare an interest in tonight's meeting? No? Thank you. Item 4 is the review of the council's temporary accommodation options. And I think Councillor Reid would like to bring this forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members. And it's nice to see you've got plenty of interest in tonight's important, I think, information. And also, I'd like to mention the fact we've got 2 cabinet members listening in to us. Thank you very much for coming. What I'd like to do is to introduce you to Elaine, who will take us through the report. And we would like you to actually wait until she's finished the report before you ask any questions or queries or anything you don't quite understand. So make a note of those as we go along, and we'll see how it all pans out. As you can see, we've got Imre here, who is looking into assets, because that's the proposed purchase of properties will affect assets. So Imre's come along to explain any queries on that one. And we've at the back here, she's the guy that's going to take all the difficult questions. Ron, come on. So with that, I'm going to ask Elaine to go through the report with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Good evening, members. So the report presented is the proposed key decision in respect of the Council's temporary accommodation options. And South Staffordshire Council, like all other authorities, needs temporary accommodation to fulfil its duties under the homelessness legislation, which requires the Council to ensure that accommodation is available for households who would otherwise be homeless. So the Council has a responsibility to provide accommodation to all eligible families with dependent children who are homeless and owed a temporary accommodation duty, along with single people who meet the test of vulnerability. There are many reasons that can lead to homelessness, such as relationship breakdowns, fleeing domestic abuse, care leavers, affordability and debt, and many other reasons, as we know. Over several years, South Staffordshire has had very low rates of homelessness and correspondingly low numbers of people being placed into temporary accommodation. And this is largely due to the work of the housing team in the prevention of homelessness, and also the ability to house homeless families and single people quickly through the Council's social housing allocation scheme and the nominations that we have with local housing associations. However, in 2023, this position has actually begun to change, with higher numbers overall applying as homeless. And the main reasons for the increase in homelessness in South Staffordshire is due to adult children being asked to leave the family home, followed by Section 21 notices being issued where the landlord requires the property back, as well as domestic abuse and violence. So the situation is compounded by the number of properties for nomination provided by Homes Plus and other housing associations actually reducing, and private rents costs increasing. So higher homeless applications inevitably means higher numbers of people being placed into temporary accommodation, because that's the only option that we have as an authority. It's clear that the current temporary accommodation provision we have access to is no longer sufficient to meet the homelessness applications that we have. And the only alternative is to use expensive bed and breakfast accommodation, which is costly to the council and often unsuitable for a homeless family or individual, because they don't have access to cooking facilities or washing. And so it makes life difficult when they're staying in bed and breakfast accommodation. So the increasing pressures due to the lack of affordable housing and increased homelessness applications will have a significant impact on the resources of the housing team and potential impacts on the finances of the council. Therefore, to meet the growing increase in demand, the council needs to urgently develop a low-cost temporary accommodation portfolio. And the proposals in this report is to deliver this requirement through two main strands. So firstly, by looking to expand the current arrangements with Homes Plus and other housing associations operating in the district, whilst at the same time to develop a temporary accommodation portfolio that's council owned, so that South Staffordshire can better control its temporary accommodation costs. Our current temporary accommodation provision is set out in section 4 of the report, and it's split between the 4 properties that we currently have with Homes Plus to provide temporary accommodation properties, and also it sets out the bed and breakfast accommodation use. As you'll see for bed and breakfast, the number of placements has increased over the last 12 months, along with the length of stay, and this trend is actually continuing into the current financial year as well. So the cost of housing people in temporary accommodation is set out in section 5 of the report, which shows the net cost to the council for 2023-24 to be over £50,000. This is the difference between the housing benefit payments that we pay out for people who are living in the temporary accommodation and the subsidy that we receive back from central government. As I say, the trend is continuing to increase, and bed and breakfast cost to the council since January this year is already well above £20,000. So section 6 of the report sets out the potential financial impacts of the council, taking into account the current homelessness trends from our own local resident population, but also talks about the additional risks that we might be faced with associated with the various asylum and refugee schemes, as well as probation service procured properties within South Staffordshire, and also the current government consultation on reforms to the changes to social housing eligibility. Therefore, taking into account the trends and the various pressures, as well as the analysis from the consultancy that was undertaken last year, it's not unreasonable to assume that we could need to house a minimum of 20 homeless households occupied over a 12-month period, and they would have to be placed into bed and breakfast accommodation if we don't have access to additional temporary accommodation properties. This could result in potential costs of around £500,000 to the authority. This calculation is based on an average weekly charge of £600 a week in bed and breakfast accommodation, less housing subsidy that we would get back for that type of accommodation, which is only just over £91 a week. So therefore, there is a net cost to the authority. Section 8 of the report sets out the proposals which are to lease additional properties from Homes Plus and other housing associations that might want to lease properties to us, as well as exploring other opportunities that they might be able to offer. However, we've already been in discussions in the last 6 or 7 months, and it's unlikely that we will be offered more than a couple of properties, and obviously that will take properties out of the social housing stock to provide temporary accommodation if we want to lease any. So section 10 sets out some of the estimated costs to look at the other option for the council to purchase our own properties on the open market for use as temporary accommodation. The estimated costs would provide a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom properties across the district. And in that analysis, there's some property prices that are currently on Rightmove at the moment. Just to give a flavour really of what's available across the district, should we wish to purchase some properties to use as temporary accommodation. The costs could be supported by applying for the Local Authority Housing Fund Round 3, which is a government funding which has been outlined in section 9 of the report. Due to the time constraints to enable the council to apply for this funding, an expression of interest was already being submitted on the 25th of March, just to ensure if we do want to apply for that funding, we've already put our expression in due to the constraints around putting that bid in by the 28th of March. So if the council is awarded the funding through this process, the grant award would provide £266,000 towards the purchase price of 2 properties. We should be notified of the outcome in early May, and then we would be required to sign a memorandum of understanding if we wanted to access this funding. So the proposal to purchase additional properties for temporary accommodation use would reduce the cost to the council considerably, because we would be eligible for full subsidy back from central government for anybody who applies for housing benefit who would be living in that temporary accommodation, which is different to people that are placed in bed and breakfast accommodation. There's quite a significant shortfall between the cost of the accommodation and the subsidy that we would get back as part of housing benefit payments. And this would obviously also be an asset that was owned by the council rather than us just paying out costs to hotels or bed and breakfast, and that money is then lost. Any purchase that we have for accommodation, we would retain that asset. And obviously there would still be a need to use bed and breakfast, but that would be restricted really to emergency use for 2 or 3 nights at a time, rather than long extended periods, which we're seeing at the moment for several weeks or months on occasion. So I've covered briefly and summarised the report. I suppose now it's has anybody got any questions?
I just want to say that 600.
Yes, it is. Yeah, the £600 per week is for one person in a household. Sometimes we have to house families in B&Bs, which isn't obviously ideal. For care leavers, we're not supposed to put them into bed and breakfast accommodation. And currently, we have a care leaver that we've had to place in a hotel in Birmingham at a cost of £650 a week. They've been there for a while now. And obviously, because it's outside of the district, it makes it more difficult for us to support that individual as well, because of the distance and other issues.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Do we have any questions, please? Councillor Allen.
Thank you for the report. I welcome the idea, although I'm quite concerned about the number of people who still will require accommodation. I've spent part of today looking at Darstone finances, and we have a lot of houses, as you know, and some of those are not always rented out when they should be. And I think having an arrangement that might be more suitable with the Darstons might help in one way. However, we've just devalued our housing, and I just want to draw that to the attention of members, because in previous years, the assets that we own in housing have about 400 assets have been increasing. This financial year, we've had to devalue them by 5%. This is an unusual thing to do and make a substantial change to our Darstone finances and our budget. Having said that, my daughter in Wales is currently experiencing in their town a substantial arrival of Afghanistan refugees. They are being housed in temporary accommodation that's actually being brought in from outside. And it made me think about mobile homes. It made me think about temporary housing. And it made me think about council land. I am fully in favour of this. For instance, if I used an example in Perth, most of our one-bedroom flats that would perfectly well suit adult children leaving a home or temporary accommodation, you're probably looking about £60,000 for the studio flats in the centre of Perth. So I think we would need to do a very wide sweep really there aren't many on the market obviously at the moment either, nor for rent. We need to do a very wide sweep about this. And it did make me think about mobile homes, and we already have a mobile home park. It made me think about the support that's required for certain elements of the requirements, especially if we have to have the 21 extra homes for the refugees. And I wonder if it's more easy to deliver sustainable help for those if they are in this relatively close location as well. So I'm not knocking this idea at all. In fact, as somebody who looks frequently at budgets for this kind of thing and for the consequential repairs and so forth, I think it is, on the whole, a good thing to do. And I'm quite conscious as well that having such a widespread geographical area, some of these homes might be quite remote from where the actual help they require is in terms of primary schools like this. And I started to wonder about cross-border properties and whether there's any thought about looking into the Wolverhampton borough where the housing is cheaper anyway, and thinking about that. It's an unusual idea, but we're in an unusual situation. And because it's a temporary accommodation issue, would we be wise to look across the border?
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I'll try and separate it out into each element because you've covered a lot of things there. I suppose first I'd like to say that we're looking at a range of options. So the purchasing of properties is just one of those. So I don't think there's going to be one solution to relieve our temporary accommodation and homelessness issues. This is just one option. And there are a number of options that we will look at and obviously take on board any opportunities that we may be able to engage with. So I think first of all, the purchasing of some properties isn't going to solve all of our problems, but it's one option that gives us some control over it. And certainly if we can tap into some funding for that as well, then even better really. With regards to different types of temporary accommodation, authorities across the country look at all sorts of accommodation, whether that's mobile homes, modular buildings, shipping containers, all sorts of types of temporary accommodation, and it's whether the authority would want to pursue some of those options. I think before we get to that stage, because we haven't got similar pressures that are faced London boroughs or on the coast, we're probably not at the point where we'd have to consider that type of accommodation. So I think it's monitoring the situation, which is what we are doing, and looking at potential opportunities that the best types of opportunities for us as an authority. To house homeless people outside of the authority, we have to notify another authority if we are going to place homeless people into accommodation. We can't purchase accommodation outside of our authority for homelessness because there are other added pressures and things that we have to think about from each local authority. For example, Wolverhampton will have their own pressures around homelessness, which are far greater than ours. But needless to say, it doesn't mean we wouldn't work with another authority, and we are looking at those options, particularly across Staffordshire, and we are working closely with other Staffordshire authorities to look at what the options are available and whether there is any joint working that we can do. So it's part of a whole collection of things that we're looking at, really, to try and look for solutions.
Thank you, Elaine. Do any further questions? I can see your hand, but I can't see your face. Oh, Councillor Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wonder if I could remind members here that in 1997, this council sold 5,500 council houses to what at the time was South Staffordshire Housing Association. It's now Housing Plus, and I mean plus, because it's got to go elsewhere. And it looks to me we're in a difficult position now of providing adequate accommodation for these unfortunate people and families. Having said that, because obviously it's history, but what I'd like to ask, Mr. Chairman, is this. The proposal is that we purchase 6 properties on the open market, as it indicates. But there are obviously additional expenses or costs that are going to be involved. How much would it cost, and who will arrange to equip these properties with whatever's necessary, beds, furniture, etc.? Second thing is, who's going to service it or check any minor issues? And then, of course, there is the question of repairs, major repairs. Does this imply we are going to set up a small, albeit small, housing department again? Or are these costs going to be farmed out to contractors? Or are you going to liaise with Housing Plus on the maintenance, etc., of these properties? Because this 1.25 million, as indicated, is not the end of it. It's really only the start when we come to owning our own property and letting it to people who are unfortunately homeless. Could we have some clarification on those points, Mr. Chairman?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ashley.
Thank you, Councillor Astley. Yeah. I think to start off with, we're looking to purchase between 2 and 3 properties, and we will continue to monitor the situation as to whether we want to increase that. We're not looking to provide social housing. This is purely to provide temporary accommodation. So we don't want to go into renting out social housing. That's not the intention of this proposal. This is purely to reduce our temporary accommodation costs by purchasing some properties to provide temporary accommodation. That will be a more cost-effective way of doing that. We already have a housing and homelessness team who manage the homelessness applications. We currently have 68 homeless applications that are live at the moment that we are working with. Not all of those are going to turn into actual homeless households, because we do a lot around prevention, and we will continue to work on prevention and find and help source accommodation, more permanent accommodation, settled accommodation, whether that's through social housing or the private sector, or to be able to remain in their home. So it depends on the reasons why somebody is presenting as potentially homeless. So there are lots of things that we do around that to prevent homelessness, but obviously there are still times when we are going to have to provide temporary accommodation, and the trend is increasing. With regards to maintaining the properties, I don't know whether you want to come in on that and the plans that we might have around that, Emre.
So we've already got a significant property portfolio when it comes to our commercial team. We've got over 200 leases that run across the whole of the district there, and we have a team that came together in the summer, combining the commercial, the assets and the estates, and within that we have our own facilities team. We've got 3 caretakers that look after the property here, managed by a facilities lead. And we've also got a chap down at Hingsford as well, which was noted earlier, Councillor Allen as well. So at the moment, what we've done is brought those 4 members together, operating more as a team, which is working really effectively across our commercial estate. We've got some existing temporary accommodation which we've been managing for the last year, and we've been utilising that team to support that housing stock that we've got there. So initially we can utilise the resources that we've got. However, you're absolutely right, as that grows, that does need to continue to be resourced, and we will need to continually monitor that to understand if it's rightfully placed that we do that, or, as many of you might know who are landlords, there are organisations out there that can provide those kind of services. We'll do a cost benefit analysis around, do we continue that service ourselves or do we look to outsource that? But it's one step at a time with that, and managing it bit by bit. So I hope that's helpful. But there was one point raised on Hingsford earlier. I wonder if Councillor Allen could come back on that, because it was noted on Hingsford that we do own a mobile home park. I just wanted to add a little bit of colour and clarification around that, if that's okay. Whilst we do own it as the land, the plots are actually owned by individuals themselves. So we have like a sublease arrangement where they pay people who own their plots pay a service charge, in essence, to look after and maintain the site. But we don't own any of the plots. They're all owned by individuals. The site is full. We have explored if there's opportunity to add further plots through the planning process. We can't do that with what's there at the moment. And those plots do go for significant sums, interestingly. There's one on for around the 200,000 mark at the moment for plots, so they do fetch a bit of a premium, interestingly. So I just hope that helped to kind of paint a bit of colour around that. But we did have the bungalow there at Hingsford, which we considered a while back. Age UK have successfully taken occupation of that and are providing a super service there for the local population, especially the people that are there. But it should be noted that it is quite an isolated area. Transport links are quite poor, I think it's fair to say. So anybody that's there would need to have vehicular access. And when we're considering temporary accommodation, we would have to think very carefully, if we had any space there, about who'd be placed there so we could give them the real support that they needed. So I hope that helps add a bit of colour there.
Just to add about the costs, obviously we'll be charging rent on the property, which will be reimbursed through the housing benefit system, because the majority of people who would be placed there would apply for housing benefit. So, for example, a 3-bedroom property, it'll vary slightly depending on the rates, the local housing allowance rates, but that would be around £750 calendar month. So we will be receiving an income from the properties, which would cover any associated costs, any maintenance costs, and that money would go back into providing that. We also receive additional funding through homelessness prevention grants and other additional grants around homelessness from central government, and that money is going to be used to furnish the properties and to buy appliances and things like that. So all of that will be covered. That won't come out of council funding. That will be directly from grant funding from central government.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. So understand what we're discussing this evening is temporary accommodation, but by definition, the occupants there are there for a short period of time and then need to move on somewhere else, presumably a lot of the time into social housing, which we have the shortage of, because as Councillor Ashley has pointed out, a lot of it's been sold off in the 80s and the 90s. So are we doing more to actually get involved with providing more social housing that these people can move into later on? You know, we've got an obligation to have certain numbers of thousands of houses built in South Staffordshire. What can we do to ensure that more of those are actually affordable rather than those that are by definition unaffordable? How can we prevail upon the developers to actually provide what we really need, which is the 1 and 2 bedroom properties, not the 3, 4, 5 bedroom that very few people can actually afford? And also on the back of, if we are buying these properties now, and I do think it is a very good idea to do this. How can we protect them from wholesale being sold off in the future in the way that has happened disastrously with social housing in the past? Thank you very much.
Elaine?
Yeah, I can't really comment on the planning side of things myself, but I suppose we can take that away and pick that up at a later point. But with regards to the properties themselves, I suppose the whole point is that it depends on the reasons for the homelessness in the first place. So some people will be there for a very short time. Some people will be there for a longer period. So, for example, if someone's there because of affordability and debt, they've got themselves into a debt situation due to the cost of living or a life-changing event or whatever that is, there's a whole host of holistic support around so that they're not just placed into the accommodation, it's supported accommodation. And with that, we have an holistic package around them to help them improve their situation. So if they're in debt, we make a direct referral through to a debt advisor at Citizens Advice that we have an agreement with, and they will support them to change their debt situation. If it's someone who has mental health issues, and as a consequence that they've become homeless, then we work with a mental health team. If it's somebody fleeing domestic abuse, then sometimes it's often addressing that situation and finding them more suitable accommodation in a different area or whatever that may be. It could be someone's unemployed and then we provide them support to get themselves in a better position to move into work. So the temporary accommodation is not there to provide permanent housing, it's there to provide that emergency support that's required really to get them into a bit better position to be tenancy ready, whether that's a care leaver or whatever that is. So they're not just placed in that accommodation, it's very much there's a holistic support around it so that we've got more time to work with that family or that individual. Obviously that's not ideal if they're in bed and breakfast accommodation, and often, particularly if it's outside of the area, which tends to be what happens now. Again, there's that disconnect and that makes it more difficult to provide that support and makes the stay in temporary accommodation longer because of that. With regards to hanging on to the social accommodations and rather than selling it, again, I suppose that depends on the finances of the council at the time and what we want to do with that asset, really.
Thank you. Councillor Harper?
If I could just come in on that point as well, just to give you some assurance, because they'll be let as temporary accommodation, they'll be let on licences, not on tenancies, so they won't be subject to the right to buy, if that's what you're thinking, that, you know, the old social housing stock, council housing stock used to be subject to right to buy provisions. Any stock that we hold for temporary accommodation will not be held as the housing stock per se, and therefore will not be subject to the right to buy provisions. So the tenants in it are not tenants, they're licensees, and they don't have that right to buy that property.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I understood that, but it's just it's owned by the council, and as you say, you're in a position to dispose of it as and when necessary. But I can't see any time in the future where we're going to not need affordable housing, whether it's temporary or social or whatever. But it's just to protect it so that it's not just disposed of as expedient when it's actually still needed by the community. That was my main concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harper Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Has this council considered potentially reaching out to local charities, homeless charities, for like match funding this property to make our money go further? That's the first question. Second one is, would the council consider ring fencing any of the funds, any of the leftover funds and revenue funds in a pot that hopefully will build up over time? We can buy more properties with that.
Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of the first question, yeah, obviously we would consider any options for match funding. So if there are any possibilities out there, we would consider them, which is why we've put the expression of interest in for the local authority housing fund, to make sure we've got that option available to us. Yeah, and at the moment you'll be aware that we have already set aside £1 million within our earmarked reserves for 24-25 to cover us around this area. And so we will be reviewing that and assessing whether that is sufficient, whether we need to build more into the ongoing budget or whether we need to continue to add to that reserve moving forward. So yes, that will be part of the ongoing budget planning process.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Allen.
I'll come back with that. Just a couple of things, really. Firstly, do we have any commercial property that could be adapted for instance, flats for single people? And secondly, have we considered buying a commercial property in the nature of a existing hotel or any other accommodation which we could then own and use? Thirdly, when we have difficulties with people who are behind with their mortgages, are we able to help pay their mortgage at all if they're on an interest-only mortgage to prevent them from becoming homeless?
It's a good question about buying commercial property and converting, because there has been some recent changes allowing you to do that. And it's fair to say that every option is on the table at the moment for us to consider. We haven't taken it too far down the line yet of actually going out to try and identify properties. So we'll be looking at all avenues to ensure that we find the right houses, the right locations, for the right price, of course. Most importantly, we've got to consider the people that are going to be moving into these properties and their access to services and transport and amenities. So there's lots to take into consideration. And if we progress with this, then it's at that time when we'll start to do that full analysis of what's most appropriate. So yes, absolutely, we would consider commercial as well, where it's right for us. And then there was that other question around, do we have any existing properties? We're in a fortunate position where 99% of our properties are leased out at the moment, so we have extremely low void rates, which is great to be able to report. But we do have some office accommodation. We have looked into it. We've deemed that they wouldn't necessarily be fitting for temporary accommodation for residential. We also need to consider where we do have properties that we've got a range of properties across the whole of the district as well. So all of those thoughts are tied into our analysis.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Adams.
The last part of my question, please. Elaine.
Yeah, regarding the was that, I think the question you're asking, Councillor Anna, was around mortgage interest and to support people who own their own properties rather than renting a property. We don't pay mortgage interest per se, but what we do is that anybody who approaches us who is at risk of homelessness, we look at it in the round. So we do have homelessness prevention funding, which we can use for a range of things to prevent somebody becoming homeless. We wouldn't pay someone's mortgage interest. That has to be a potential outcome really that would prevent them. So it's not just a case of continually paying somebody's mortgage interest, because that's not going to change their situation. It's more about relieving something initially and supporting that person if they've got other debts, for example, support with budgeting. So whatever the issue was really, if they'd become unemployed or there was a life-changing incident, it's what other support could we provide around that family or individual.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Elaine, relating to section 4, where we've got the homes plus temporary accommodation, and we've got the TA accommodation and B&B placements. We've got numbers up to 2023, And we're now sort of like a third of the way through 2024. You said it was an increasing trend. Do you have statistics as to where we sit at the moment in today's money? And the reason which concerns me is that you mentioned it was £600 per week and we get £91 a week back, which is £509 it's costing us every week, which is an awful lot of money. And I can see the logic in where we need to go actually to try and reduce that amount going out every period of time. How much have we actually spent so far in this year in actually that type of accommodation?
Sorry. Since January, the net cost to us is £21,185 for people placed into bed and breakfast accommodation so far.
Increase on last year.
It is an increase on last year, yes. So in the total of last year, it was 50, just over £50,000 the net cost. But so far this year, it's over 20,000. So yeah, there's the.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kinsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few things from me. They both relate, funnily enough, to section 3.3 and item 2 in the report. Just as a matter of note, it says there that currently we're supporting 56 homeless households. Now that's all well and good. I'm interested in what happens when, for instance, individuals presenting as homeless are deemed to be voluntarily homeless. I know that some time ago I was supporting a resident who appeared to be in exactly that situation, was actually offered accommodation and went through a process of saying, oh, no, I don't want that one. I don't want that one. Eventually, she did end up in temporary accommodation, only to decide that that they actually really quite liked it, didn't want to move out and wanted to buy it. My concern really is where individuals in this kind of way presented to us in this kind of way, there's often an awful lot else going on, whether it be mental health or whatever else. We've got a very specific fix for a very particular issue here, but I'm really interested in how this all dovetails with partnership working and all of the other different services that connect here. Is there any more that we can do, or effectively are we doing the best we can with the tools we have at the minute? My particular question, so that's one. My second question, particular question really is in the same section. It is mentioned that Homes Plus are reducing the number of nomination properties available to us. So I get some idea of that happening. Why is that? Please, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
The properties from Homes Plus, the nominations are reducing for a number of reasons. I think really, there's less movement in social housing to start off with, so there's less properties becoming available. For one, because obviously the pressures of cost of living, people being able to move on to other accommodation, I think is reducing, but also Homes Plus, I think, are going through a phase of updating a lot of their properties. There's been a lot of emphasis around poor social housing accommodation, so they're in the process of updating their accommodation. So again, that reduces availability because we've got longer void periods where properties are undergoing repairs. So I think there are a number of reasons why there's less social accommodation available to us. I think that the first comment that you had, Councillor Kinsey, is a valid one, and a lot of the work that the housing team do isn't in isolation. It is with other teams across the council, it is with the county council, it is with the police, other organisations, voluntary organisations, including Citizens Advice, mental health and the NHS. So we work together as much as we can do. We have as you're aware, we have a vulnerability hub that meets on a weekly basis, where a number of organisations come together to discuss cases, share information, because often some of these individuals have got chaotic lives. They've got a number of issues that need to be addressed. It's not just one, it's not just a housing issue, it's a lot of issues that need to be addressed in order to support the family or the individual, and that continues to happen, and we continue to do that. I'm sure there's always improvements and additional things we can do, and we're always looking to do that, but we do a lot of work, as I say, around prevention, and we'll continue to do that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, excellent.
Members, do we have any further questions? No, I can't see any. There is a recommendation at 7 that members consider the proposed key decision for the review of the council's temporary accommodation options and provide comments to the Cabinet Member for Welfare Services, Cabinet Member for Digital Transformation and Estate Management. We will consent that we've had the opportunity to do that. Okay, thank you. Well, that completes our agenda items. Can I thank you for your contributions and attendance, and particularly Elaine. And at 7:17, I formally close the meeting.